Former State Senator Tim Cullen of Janesville wrote a book. It's called Ringside Seat. It'll soon be available. Tim has joined me to talk about it. Tim, thanks so much. A little bit about Tim. He was a child of a middle-class family in Janesville. He was going to be a government teacher.
High school social studies
High
teacher.
school social studies teacher. And then he met Les Aspin, former congressman, former Secretary of Defense. Ended up getting elected to the Janesville City Council in 1970. State senator election 1974. Became majority leader in
82.
In 82. And you left to become Secretary of the Department of Health and Social Services in 1987. And then you were in private business healthcare for 20 years and retired from that, came back to the Senate, elected in 2010, served from 2011 through the end of 2014. Well, and that's why it's called Ringside Seat,
Yeah.
Tim.
It is, and of course, the complete accuracy was sometimes I was in the ring, sometimes I was at the ringside seat, but I kind of like the name Ringside Seat.
I want us to, we're going to get to some of these issues. You know, we'll get to Act 10 and education and all that, but I have an overview question. Would you have written it if Republican Governor Walker and Republican legislators hadn't made such dozens of profound major changes over the last 5 years, 4 of which you witnessed?
I wouldn't have written this book without that, of course. And there's no question that all that made me want to write a book to compare the past with my first era here with this one. So certainly that all did drive this book. What I had thought about doing was writing a book about the public sector versus the private sector. Mm-hmm. And there's a little bit of that in the book, but largely it was the last 4 years and how different it was from a quarter century ago. That's what drove me to write this book.
We're going to talk about some of the disagreements you've had with Governor Walker in the course of the program, but how would you characterize his leadership overall prior to us talking about some of these specific issues, sir?
Well, I think the first thing I have to say is that he decided, unlike his 12 predecessors who I talk about, decided to govern just from the right. And he had a legislature willing to go to the right with him, more than any previous governor did. But that's a very different way of governing. And we went back and looked at the previous 12, all the way back to Walter Kohler in 1951. Mm-hmm. And all those governors, 6 Democrats, 6 Republicans, it turns out by coincidence, all governed somewhere near the center. The Republican governors, center right, Democratic governors, center left. And that was how I think they read Wisconsin. I think they read Wisconsin right, that's where the citizenry wants their government to be, kind of in the middle, a little left, a little right. And then Governor Walker decided with the legislature to go to the far right only. Well,
and let's look at the first pulled quote that I have from your book, which goes over this, but it's important enough to come back to. Since the 1964 election, voters were never terribly upset regardless of whether a Democrat or a Republican was elected. People saw that the basic values of a strong majority of Wisconsinites were not disrupted or attacked. Change, you write, was never a surprise. So this is you attributed to your good friend Bill Krause the policy of containment. Explain containment, Tim.
Containment is what, and Bill Krause it's his perfect word, I think. I agree with it already, but I never had the perfect word. It meant that through some people I talked to as really the wise men of the Democrat and Republican parties back then, they made sure that their governors governed the way their party preferred, but the governors never let the extreme wing of their party take over their governorship on either side. And that's what I mean. And I think Wisconsin people got used to that. And so that's why, and I can remember, I was always unhappy if the Democrat lost, but I was never upset or worried. I didn't think that the Republican governor who won, whether it was Knowles or Dreyfus or Thompson or whoever, I never thought they were ever going to, you got to know over time, they weren't going to blow the place up, regardless of which party won.
You were in office a second time. You came back to the Senate only a few days when Act 10, which you called a bomb. By the way,
he called it a bomb.
I understand, but guess how many times you used the term bomb in this book? Because I counted. 81.
A lot.
A lot. Okay. So
I didn't know the number.
He dropped 81. He drops the first bomb, Act 10. You're one of the senators. All Democratic senators go to Illinois, and you say You agreed to go to Illinois on the day that you had announced the tragic death of one of your best friends, former Supreme Court Justice Bill Bablich. You agreed to go to Illinois, but once you get there, your first question is, how do we get back? And you say in your book there was no end game. Now, as a former Senate Majority Leader in the that must have surprised you.
Well, it shocked me a lot, because I think when you go someplace, whether it's into a war, a real war, or a political war, if you will, you should have a plan to get back.
Yeah. And so you shuttle
get out,
you Democrats shuttle around, you have talks to try to reach an agreement. You think at one point that you're willing to negotiate some possibly acceptable changes, more acceptable to your party, although you say no Senate Democrat was ever going to vote for it. Excuse
Correct.
me. Then you come back. It's really interesting. And I want to go to another quote from the book. Governor Scott Walker always seems to need an enemy, not an opponent. He apparently does not believe that his job is to get groups of people together to work out their differences. As somebody who negotiated with his chief of staff and then his chief of staff and deputy, were the governor's emissaries to talk about some potential changes that would get you back? Were they not negotiating in good faith, Tim?
I believe they were negotiating in good faith. And I'm assuming, well, we assumed at the time that they had directions about what they could negotiate on and what they could potentially change.
Yes.
But I don't know that for sure, because I've never had a chance to interview all of them. One of my thoughts is that his staff may have been more worried about him being recalled than he was. And that his staff was interested in maybe some modifications of the bill. But it's always important, I'm glad you said it, to understand that we were negotiating changes in exchange for coming back.
Yes.
Not to come back. We were never going to negotiate a bill good enough that we would possibly vote for it. And
Right.
and they knew it too. That was a complete understanding. But sometimes I saw one story that said we were negotiating changes that would have led to our support, and that was never going to happen.
On a very sad day for you, the loss of your good friend Bill Bablich, you were in the Capitol. The family had asked you to talk to reporters, and the Senate Republicans were going to have a call of the House where nobody could leave. Senator Mike Ellis, Republican Senator Mike Ellis, gave you 2 chances to get out of there before the call of the House. Does this speak to the old-time camaraderie and working together that you saw in the Senate you first joined in 1975?
Well, it's exactly an example of it. And Mike Ellis was a friend of Bill Bablich's too, not as close as I was, but he liked Bill and served with Bill and so on. And so what Mike Ellis did, it's been somewhat misunderstood, I think. Mike Ellis didn't help me get out of the Capitol. What Mike Ellis assured me of is they weren't going to put a call of the House on until 11 a.m. And so that's when you can't get out, if they put what's called a call of the House on.
Right.
So I just had to be out of the Capitol before 11. What the kind gesture he made was, after I had gotten out of the Capitol, and it was wall-to-wall people. It was hard getting out of there. I got in my car and I took off, and I was only probably 6 blocks from the Capitol, and my cell phone rang. And it was Mike, and Senator Ellis said, "Did you get out?"
Yeah.
And I said, "Yeah, I'm on my way. I'm going to Illinois." And he said, "Good, thanks, bye."
Yep.
But it was that I thought was a nice gesture, because he knew how tumultuous it was in the Capitol that morning.
One thing that I found very interesting is you were told by the Rock County Sheriff and the Janesville Police Chief that they could not have come to your door in Janesville and hauled you back to the Capitol to vote to pass that bill.
Correct.
You learned that when? Doing this book? Researching this book?
No, I learned it after we'd been in Illinois several days. I mean,
which is the reason you snuck home. You didn't want to stay in an Illinois hotel.
No, and eat. I wanted the home cooking and everything. My wife's a great cook, and my home was close to where we were, closer than most senators' homes. So I would come home and change the clothes and so on, and warm meal, and go back and forth. And because the reality was, the only way they could detain you and make you come back to the Capitol was to arrest you. And of course, being in your home is not against the law. And so my sheriff, the sheriff of Rock County, not my sheriff, the sheriff of Rock County said, they can't detain you and force your return to Madison unless they arrest you, and they have no basis for arresting you. And he said, if they come to your door and you ask them to leave and they won't leave, you call the sheriff's department, and we will come and arrest them for trespassing. So, but we didn't know all that when we went to Illinois, nor did the Republicans, I don't think.
I think you leave the Act 10 example in your book by saying all this debate and controversy caused by Democrats leaving, but you seem to say it was the wisest choice because it bought time for people to understand everything that was in Act 10, which seems to be saying, I didn't much like it, but I'd go to Illinois again. Fair, is that fair, Tim?
It is fair. I think what I say in the book, and I think has to be made clear, is when we got to Illinois, I was glad we went. We slowed down the bill. The public had a chance to find out what's going on. Because remember, we're coming off those 12 governors I said who governed near the middle.
Yes.
This is 6 weeks into his term of this new governor. The people of Wisconsin aren't ready to see this kind of actions by their governor. They hadn't seen it for 60 years.
Okay.
And so I thought it made a lot of sense. But I also thought, after a few days, that there was sort of a shelf life to being in Illinois. That there was sort of like it was a good idea, but then after a certain amount of time, it wasn't such a great idea, and then it became a bad idea. And the problem was there was no strategy to come back. And so my thought was, and it shared with Senator Jelk a lot, was, well, we're not in a great position of strength to negotiate. We're in the minority, and we're in Illinois. Right. And whenever we come back, they will have the quorum to pass whatever they want to pass. Anyway. So my thought was, and Bob shared it, was, well, then let's, and we were approached by the governor's staff to negotiate. We did not initiate the discussion. They did. Mm-hmm. And we thought, well, if we can get some modifications of the bill, which at least save collective bargaining, we weren't going to get the money taken out. And in fact, the unions here were willing to give on the money
and you say in your book they should have given, that they should have been paying more for their pension and health care.
I said that, but I also said that, I did say that, but I also said that to be fair to them, you could have phased it in. You could have phased it in over 4 to 5 years. You didn't have to whack them all right away the first year with a 6-8%.
And you didn't have to take away the automatic dues collection, and you didn't have to destroy WEAC. So you're saying in your book, they should have contributed more, it should have been phased in, but this whole other part was bad public policy. Why is it good, bad public policy, excuse me?
Well, there's really nothing wrong, in my view, with having teachers be able to bargain collectively. I mean, people can just simply disagree with that. But the problems in public education, which I go into in the book.
Yes, you do, and we're going to get there because you have a concept called the unchild that I want you to explain. But go ahead.
You know, the problems in public education weren't that the teachers had a union. There were a bunch of other things which I go into. But it was reasonable to have the public employees pay more. And I say because you don't want the private sector workers and the public sector workers to be divided, which is what the governor wanted to do here, because you want them supporting each other. Okay. So you can't have the private sector workers with almost no pensions, just 401ks, and paying a lot for their health insurance and often not as good a health insurance. Yeah. You want them supporting public education. You want them supporting teachers. So I thought you don't want them too far apart. But the way he did it, as fast as he did it, with no warning, I completely disagree with. Phasing in more payments over 4 or 5 years, I thought was reasonable. But our goal there was to save collective bargaining. And two of the key things that we had a tentative agreement, not an agreement on, but we had a tentative agreement that day in South Beloit on March 6, 2011, was one, there'd be no cap on the possibility of negotiating pay raises. There was no consumer price index cap, no required local referendum. That would just be wide open negotiations for future pay raises. Yep. And secondly, they could negotiate workplace safety, which any good negotiator could make that I think really saved collective bargaining. Because what is workplace safety? It isn't just slippery floors. It could be classroom size. Yeah. It could be hours. Yeah. It could be a lot of things. So those two things saved collective bargaining, gave the governor what he said he wanted publicly, which was the money to balance his budget out of the public employees. And that was always the obvious deal if you wanted a deal. I mean, there's other specifics about it, but that was always the fundamental deal. Get the money to balance your budget and leave collective bargaining alone. That was a simple deal if you wanted a deal.
And Act 10 ushered in a period of history that you and I were both fortunate to witness. Me from the Capitol Press Room, you from the Senate. We had our first, we had a recount for the Supreme Court. Then you had 11 state Senate recall elections. Then you had a recall elections for the lieutenant governor. Then you had a recall election for the governor in 2012. And you say about that recall election for the governor, a combination of factors led the Democratic candidate in 2012, the recall, Milwaukee Mayor Tom Barrett, to look like the public employee candidate for governor. Not a winning image when 90% of the voters are not public employees. In 2010, Governor Walker called public employees the haves and taxpayers the have-not. So elaborate on why you say Barrett was dealt a bad hand in the recall election.
Well, he's dealt a bad hand for a lot of other reasons, too. He's a fine man. Recall law also, huge part of it was there was this loophole in the recall law which said that the candidate facing the recall, which is the case Governor Walker,
yes,
from a window when the papers are filed to when the GAB declared election, which was basically November 10 to November 11 till April of 2012, the candidate facing a recall can raise unlimited amounts of money from anyone, anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world. And whereas Barrett or whoever the Democratic candidate,
they were bound by the
$10,000 cap.
Yes.
So the governor could travel the country raising, and I list them, a whole bunch of them in the back of the book, and 250,000, 500,000, 100,000 from a variety of people, whereas Barrett was limited to 10,000 or whoever was going to be the candidate. So he had advantages beyond that, but I think the public always recognized that labor largely supported Democrats. The union supported Democrats. That's not a secret. But the Democratic candidate ran as the Democratic candidate for governor, not the union candidate for governor or the public employee union candidate for governor. And the way the public employee union leadership tried to manipulate and play a role in who the Democratic nominee was going to be, that all went on back then. And then the ads they ran, which kept showing the demonstrations in the recall election, after the citizens were already tired, as you said, of 11 state Senate recalls,
and a Supreme Court recall,
and a Supreme Court recall, or recount.
Recount. Thank you for the correction, Senator.
But the other thing about those 11 state Senate recalls, even though it's only a third of the state Senate, where they were geographically located, those 11 races, every TV market in Wisconsin was blasted with the negative ads of those recall elections before we ever got to the negative ads of the governor's recall election. Mm-hmm. So the public was
recall fatigue.
Recall fatigue was no question it was there, and a lot of people disagree. And I have some great sympathy for it, and I write about it. Recalling people because you disagree with their policy,
with the votes they've taken.
With the votes they've taken.
The policy decisions they've made.
Because as I say in the book, the average person comes up to you and says, just go to Madison and do the right thing. Just do that. Don't get mixed up in politics. Just do what you think is right for your district or Janesville or wherever. That's what people say all the time. So if a legislator or a governor goes and does what he thinks is right, even though you disagree with it, I don't think it's a basis for recall, nor did most of the state. And that helped. If you really were adamantly against recall, you were more inclined to vote for Governor Walker than for
more
Tom
votes
Barrett.
Cast in the recall election for governor than the 2010 election for governor. So there must have been quite a few people who said, just on principle alone, I don't believe in recalls coming out.
Yep.
Let me ask you this, though. Why can't your party beat Scott Walker 2010, 2012, 2014? Have you had the wrong candidates or the wrong message, or is he the super politician, best since Tommy?
No, he's not a super politician, and he's not close to Tommy. I think it's worth pointing out, especially since you mentioned Tommy, the governor wins election, recall election, and then re-election, each time with 52% of the vote.
Yes.
Governor Thompson, in his 3 elections, re-elections, won with 58%, 67%, and 60%. So this 52, 50, 52, 52, whatever, doesn't really measure up to what happens when a governor tries to make the tent bigger and get more people supporting him. But you ask, is it our candidates? I think in 2010, Wisconsin, other than Tommy Thompson, Wisconsin doesn't stick with its governors very long. If you go back all the way through history, The longest serving governor in history is Tommy at 15. The second longest is Doyle at 8. And the third longest is Lucy at 6.5. So all their governors since 1848 was 6 years or less.
Yes.
So we've had 8 years of Democratic control. We've had the national recession, which was enormously damaging to Wisconsin, but not caused by any Wisconsin governor, not caused by Governor Doyle or whoever would have been governor.
Okay.
So the old saying, I talk about this, best political saying of all time is, it's time for a change. I mean, so Walker had all that going for him in 2010. He was the governor who was going to create the jobs, which is what he talked about, and the Democrats were the one who were presiding over this horrible recession, and 8 years of Democrats. So he had a lot going for him, and he wins still, and he has the mayor of Milwaukee as an opponent. And as much as I respect Tom Barrett, nothing to do with Tom Barrett, but if the history of Wisconsin governor's races is Milwaukee mayors have never done well. We've seldom nominated them, but there's still an anti-Milwaukee bias out state, which is a lot older than I am.
And well, one of my questions is it getting worse? The anti-Milwaukee, the Democratic Party leadership has come usually on an axis from Madison to Milwaukee, with the exception of the new party chair who's out of the Fox Valley. Yeah. Is there growing animus for Democrats outstate, northern Wisconsin, western Wisconsin?
I'm not traveling around talking to them, but I would guess there is. There are a lot of Democrats outstate who are, from what I hear, are going. Looks like the Democrats care the most about Madison and Milwaukee. I don't believe that's true. The Democratic leader in the Senate is from La Crosse, Senator Schilling, for example, and the Democratic leader in the Assembly is from Kenosha. But there still is that bias, and the Democrats get, because of this red-blue stuff, we get an enormous number of votes out of Dane County and Milwaukee County.
Okay, you and I can talk for an hour, but we can't afford to. So let's go to one of your issues, reapportionment. I don't spend a lot of time, but here's what I want to ask. You say on reapportionment you can't trust either party, but then, and that's on one page, but then I cobbled together a quote from another page, so mea culpa. I deeply wish getting reelected wasn't such a high priority for so many people. And then finally, people in both parties wake up in the morning to fight the war. That's on page 212. Now, I grabbed several different fragments, but it seems to me, are you saying, you also say, Republicans through, I say reapportionment, you're going to use the G word. Go ahead, say it.
Gerrymander.
I knew you.
How did you know?
I knew you wouldn't let me down.
No.
But you say they're going to. They've got control of the ledge locked up till 2020. Is it that bleak?
There's a chance in the Senate, but I would say the Assembly's, absent some just huge wave of Democratic support, the top of the ticket winning was 60% or something like that.
Yep.
Absent that kind of thing, they have control.
Why doesn't your book offer a blueprint to getting back to the majority for Wisconsin Democrats?
Because that wasn't why I wrote the book.
Okay.
My book is a history as best possible of the last 45 years, and in some cases the last 65 years.
Now, since time is, I'm having worlds of fun, but time is getting away. Let's talk about education.
Yes.
Let's talk about K-12. You say in there, and it's predictable, so I'm not going to ask you to repeat it. You know, you're against vouchers, and I understand that. But you have a word in here that in your book that I want to ask about. You say, we have seen the emergence of the unchild. Explain that.
Well, it's something that I concluded back when I was in the Janesville School Board back in about 2008, 2009. And what it is it's not to say that they're not a child when I say unchild, but there's so many uns in their life is what I'm saying. Is that they're unloved at home,
unread to,
unhugged, undisciplined. No one cares what time they go to bed. No one cares if they get up. No one cares if they're dressed warm when they leave for school. A lot of schools don't have school on relatively cold days because they got too many kids who aren't getting bundled up at home. That's an issue why the whole school closes. And then if they come to school, they're unready to learn. And then that just isn't a very bad thing for that student to be not doing well in school. That leads to disruption in the classroom. It leads to the teacher having to focus more on that kid than a bunch of other kids. It affects the whole school system. And so I name them the unchild. At the end of the day, they're fundamentally unloved. That's really the ultimate conclusion. And that's one of the issues, big issues in public education. It's the problems that students bring from the outside, often the home, into the classroom, which are a lot of the difficulties. And none of those problems have anything to do with whether the teacher's in a union. I mean, that's the point I try to make in the book.
Don't the private schools, and we've seen with the emergence of choice and now choice and vouchers statewide, don't the teachers in the private schools have to deal with the same unchild?
No.
They don't?
No, because those schools have a choice of who to take. They can turn down students. They don't have to take everyone. They can take whoever they want. They can cherry pick the best students if they want. Okay. The public school system must take everyone who shows up to the door. Now they can expel them if they do some terrible things, but they must take them. And in fact, if they left the public school, went to a private school, and were disruptive and a problem there, that school can send them back to the public school, and the public school must take them.
Okay. I have a couple more subjects.
Yeah.
Time is getting away. I found your book very revealing on the issue of mining. Just give us the short version of what you learned about mining. It was rejected once by the vote of Dale Schultz. He doesn't run again. There's another vote that comes in, Senator Rick Gudex, so they passed the mining bill. The lessons, what did you learn about that mining bill? Passing, failing, you offered options. The mining example.
Well, what I learned about it was when you have one-party control and you listen to an interest group rather than the people of Wisconsin, you end up with bad legislation.
You say Gogebic wrote that bill.
Gogebic wrote the bill.
That's not me saying that. That's
Senator Fitzgerald acknowledged that with the press, that when asked to sort of try to nail him down, did Gogebic write the bill? He said yes. Okay. And it was only modestly changed over a couple of years of when it was floating around. It didn't pass right away. But what I learned was you should listen to the people that are most affected by your state policy. The people most affected by that, in a narrow sense, that mine in the Pinocchio Hills in southern Ashland County, were the people of Ashland County. All the water in the Pinocchios, because of a continental divide south of the Pinocchios, flows north into Lake Superior. You don't think of water
Iron
flowing.
County.
Not through Iron.
Well, it's understand.
It doesn't. The
water
mine
would have been. The mine would have affected Ashland and Iron. But go ahead.
The mine would have affected Iron and Ashland County.
Yes.
But the pollution of the water would have only affected Ashland County because it all flows ultimately into the Bad River up north into Lake Superior.
Through the tribal reservation.
Through the tribal reservation. But the Republicans never held a hearing on that bill in Ashland County. They would go to Iron County where they thought they had some more support.
Okay.
And the issue was always about water. It was people who wanted to protect the water in the Pinocchios. It was the fresh water was going into the largest freshwater body lake in the world.
Okay.
And the mining company's problem was the same water. There was too much water.
Yep.
And if they were going to mine there, where were they going to put the waste? Okay. And they couldn't economically do it without putting it in the water. And so they changed the law to allow them to put it in the water, the law that they wrote. And then the other thing I learned from it is the impact of secret money. I mean, Gogebic Taconite, we know through some emails from the John Doe that they had dumped $700,000 into the 2012 elections. We don't know how much they dumped into the recall elections. The Chamber of Commerce, the state chamber, WMC, dumped $2 million into the state senate, one state senate seat up in Oshkosh and Fond du Lac area, the 18th.
And that was Gudex versus King?
That was Gudex versus King. And dumped $2 million in the last 60 days.
Gudex won by 600 votes.
Out of about
74,000.
70, 80.
0.7%.
Yeah.
Well, while we're talking about mining, here's what
and then, of course, that gave the Republicans what they called the Schultz-proof Senate.
Yeah.
They didn't need Dale. They had 18. You only need 17, so they could lose Dale's vote and still have the 17 majority.
That's pretty hardball politics. Here's what you say about money. The sad truth, of course, is that the candidates know who spends on their behalf. It's just the voters who don't. It's come to that.
Amen.
Is that a result of Citizens United?
Amen. I don't have to elaborate on that quote.
Okay. I want to ask you this. Did you inherit the caucus system? Were there caucus employees doing political work on state time when you were majority leader?
No, and it was partly because they were a different kind of employee. The employees of the state senators back then were largely those who came with the state senator who won. They came from their district.
Yes.
And they were really dedicated to their boss. What they would do then, and this is that slippery slope of problems, is they would go back and campaign on weekends on their own time. But Donnie Snyder was his chief clerk, and we were very careful about this, that they weren't campaigning going there during the week.
Okay.
But like all slippery slopes, gradually as it got into the 80s and 90s, and certainly by this century, they weren't just going back on the weekends. They weren't just going back on Friday. They were going back all week, and they were still getting paid.
And here's what you say on page 203. Capitol staffers started looking the other way as staff worked on campaigns on the public clock.
That's what happened.
And the slippery slope then into the caucuses. Then the position of leadership was, well, if you have the same caucus resources and we do, then it's all fair.
Yeah. We both get to cheat.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. You were an executive in the healthcare industry for 20 years?
Yes.
Okay. Why not go to a single-payer system in the nation?
I'd be fine going with a single-payer system because I fundamentally believe, my fundamental thing is everybody should have health insurance. And if we can't deliver it any other way, then we should deliver with a single-payer system.
Would it be better than the Affordable Care Act / Obamacare?
Yes, it would be better. But one of the things that does happen, if you have a single-payer system, that Medicare for all is what is often used. That means that the government right now is able to cost shift off of Medicare and Medicaid onto private insurance coverage or onto people who have no insurance at all. If you take away the private health system and only have Medicare for all, the government won't have anybody to cost shift on. It'll be all on the taxpayer or the people who are paying for their coverage in Medicare and Medicaid. So, but the number one thing is everybody should have health insurance. I wouldn't be alive today, problems I've had, if I didn't have health insurance. Or I'd be broke.
2002 cancer?
I might still be alive, but I'd be broke. Yeah, 2002.
Let's end it this way. I want to ask you about a few quotes. Quickly, if you, quote, if you are the person in power, you can discount about 80% of the flowery things people say to you. Why?
Because they're trying to curry favor with you, not tell you the truth. My favorite example was when I worked for Les Aspin. I'd be at a reception with Les, and some person from the district would come up to me who was on his staff, and they'd be not yelling at me, but Aspin's doing this wrong, and Aspin's not doing this right, and Aspin's not doing that right. And I'd finally say to them, I'd say, no, Les is standing right over there. And they go over there, Congressman, good to see you. You're doing a fine job in Washington. Great. And I go, whoa. So I learned that early, and I passed it on to all the governors that I got to know. Tommy remembers me passing it on to him.
And you offer this advice to anyone, even your grandchildren, that considers politics. It is extremely unlikely that one ever makes a true close friend among other politicians. Why?
Well, it's because a true close friend you share your weaknesses and your faults with.
Yeah.
I mean, how many people in public office are really going to have a senator sit next to you and start going to confession to the senator next to you? It just isn't going to happen. That's why this wonderful close relationship with Bill Bablich was really unusual.
Yeah. What about your good friend Paul Ryan, now Speaker of the U.S. House? Did you interact much with him? You must have. You're both sons of Janesville.
Oh, yeah, I've known Paul for a long time.
Is he going to be a good speaker? Is he going to be chopped up like Boehner?
Well, if he gets, I would just say if he gets chopped up, then nobody could do it. I think Paul is the best person. I know him pretty well. I think he's the best person to have a chance to be successful in that job. Now, whether that fringe of his party wants to let him be successful and whether he can control him is up in the air. I think he's off to a good start. I think Boehner helped him get some stuff out of the way before he took over.
Is there still hope for our capital as opposed to Washington? Which do you write off Washington?
Well, I'm as pessimistic as anybody. I don't write anything off because politics changes. The winds change, and so. But I'm optimistic. I say in the book for two reasons. One is the younger generation. I think that people under 40 are the most tolerant generation in our nation's history. We heard about the greatest generation in World War II. I think these are the most tolerant. And I think as they grow into positions of responsibility in the public and private sector, I think we're going to have a better kind of human being running our institutions, and they're going to help lift a level of public support for our institutions.
There's hope for our political institutions?
Yes, there is.
Instead of this gridlock?
I believe there is. And the other reason I'm hopeful is the internet. The internet is the great way for the average person to connect with other average people, to raise small amounts of money, large amounts of money in small amounts through the internet. and to connect with people that care about the same cause as you do. I think it's a great equalizer, if there is one, to the big secret money.
Okay, let's do one final bit of business. I want to put it on the record. Profits from this book, where are they going?
They're going to a foundation.
You're not taking them.
I'm not taking any of them.
Okay.
They're going to a foundation I started in Janesville, which provides scholarships to students of color from Janesville who want to be teachers. It provides them with a scholarship, $5,000 a year. And then in exchange, they agree to go study to be a teacher.
Yes.
And get their teaching certificate. And then they agree to come back and teach in Janesville. Because Janesville has, because I think if you take a picture of the teachers and the picture of the students, they ought to kind of look alike. In Janesville right now, 26% of the students are students of color, and less than 2% of the teachers are teachers of color. Not the teacher's fault.
Right.
It's just that Janesville, like many communities in the state, have become significantly more racially diverse in the last 20, 30 years. And we're largely all white communities prior to that. That's the one I grew up in. So
how many fellows have you had participate in this program?
We have had 5 go all the way through and are teaching in Janesville today.
Okay.
And we have 4 now. We're going to have 4 in the pipeline, in school somewhere along the way. And now this book, I hope, is going to help. But looks like we're going to have enough money next spring to offer 3 more scholarships. So those numbers may seem small to people, but when I started this, out of 850 teachers in Janesville, 6 were white.
Only 6 of 850?
Six were non-white. I'm sorry.
Out of
6 out of
Thanks
850.
for the correction.
So
Okay.
we're making progress. And the teachers union, teachers down there support this like crazy too.
When I finished your book, I thought Tim Cullen has had a pretty amazing ride. Pretty fair?
I have. I had a heck of a ringside seat. That's what I've had. I've been very fortunate, beyond belief.
Ringside Seat, and it's going to be available soon?
It'll be available. It should be been available by the weekend of December 5th.
Okay. Tim Cullen, thanks very much for talking to Wisconsin.
Thank you very much. Thank
Thanks.
you.